Welcome to Toyota Time with Timmy the Toolman and Sean. Today we have a new special guest at the Timmy the Toolman Studios. His name is Lee, and what we're going to do for Lee is we're going to work on his FZJ80 Land Cruiser. We're going to replace the water pump, we're going to replace the heater control valve, and we're going to replace some of the heater hoses. Now, when it comes to the heater hoses, we might not be able to get to all of them because some of them are really hard to get at the back of the engine, between the firewall and the engine. And if I see that it's going to be a little bit too involved and we might not be able to succeed at getting them off and new ones back on, I'm going to tap out and not replace those, because it's not like he just lives a few miles away from me. He lives a couple hours away from me, and I want to make sure that he can actually get home tonight. So we're going to do what we can do in regards to the heater hoses, but like I said, if it looks like it's going to be too difficult to get to because of the tight access, I'm not going to go for it. With all that said, let's get out to the rig and get started with this job. All right, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to get the radiator draining. To get access to the petcock valve on the bottom of the radiator, I'm going to remove the small engine cover right now. All right, I'm underneath the rig. You have the steering stabilizer shock right here, and this is the engine undercover. You have a 12mm bolt over here. You've got one here in the front. It looks like Lee's missing one right here. There should be one there. And then there's another one over here on the driver's side. So there should be a total of 4, but he only has 3. Here's a better full shot of the cover that I'm removing, shooting from the driver's side. I'm going to use my Milwaukee long reach ratchet with a short extension and a 12mm socket. And then you want to bring the cover out towards the driver's side. And close your eyes because there's a lot of grit. Just like that. The petcock valve for this radiator, from what I remembered when I did a radiator replacement on my buddy Ray's FJ80, it's right here on the driver's side, right next to this cooler nipple. And it's a little bit hard to get to because of the cooler line and the hose in the way. And one thing I just noticed is this cooler line is loose, and there's evidence of transmission fluid leaking out underneath. So it's coming from here, and it's really hard to get in there with wrenches to be able to retighten this fitting so he's not going to be leaking transmission fluid. So I think the radiator is going to have to come out. Hopefully in your case you're not going to find something like this, but I think we're going to have to take this job to another level and remove the whole radiator, unfortunately. So there it is there. You have to turn this little plastic petcock valve lefty-loosey counterclockwise to start draining the coolant out. Okay, we've got the coolant draining, and to expedite the draining, you'll want to remove the radiator cap because it's going to allow air to get into the system and vent it so it drains faster. If you don't remove this, then it's going to drain really, really slowly. Next, we're going to remove a couple hoses off the top of the engine. This is the number 3 bypass pipe, and it's held on with a constant tension clamp right here. I'm going to use a bent nose needle nose pliers, compress it, slide it back, give the hose a twist, and pull it off. Next, I'm going to disconnect the inlet pipe or the upper radiator hose. The OEM clamps are a constant tension clamp, just like the one I just removed for this bypass pipe, but this has obviously been replaced with a screw down clamp. I don't like these as much as the regular OEM constant tension clamps. The constant tension clamps are way superior. Okay, that's disconnected. So if you have a screw down clamp, I highly recommend replacing them with the OEM constant tension clamps. And Lee, being the smart guy that he is, he went ahead and bought those for this job. So good job, Lee. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to loosen the nuts that attach the fan clutch to the fan pulley. You have a couple different ways of being able to get the resistance to be able to release those nuts. They're 12 millimeter. You can push down on the belt and create some additional tension, and hopefully when you get your 12 millimeter wrench on there, the tension you're applying by pushing down on the belts is going to hold it firm and you can loosen it. If it's still slipping and you require more holding power, then what you can do is get in here with a screwdriver or a pry bar and you wedge it in between two of the neighboring nuts, and then you can hold it firm and you can loosen the nuts that way. I'm first going to try the method of putting a little bit of pressure on the belt. So I'm utilizing a long 12 millimeter box end wrench from Gear Wrench, and I'm going to get on one of them and see if I can loosen it by holding some pressure against the belt. Okay, I got that one. See if I can get this one. Got that one. I'm going to turn this just with this nut that's tight. I'm going to get it up to the top. Got that one. And then the last one. Got them all. Let me show you the technique I'm talking about with the pry bar. You would slide the pry bar in between two of the nuts, and then you can apply pressure in the correct direction. So I'm going to be applying force, turning this thing counterclockwise. I'd have to apply force in the clockwise position, and then I'd be able to hold it firm. So this is what I'm talking about by using a pry bar or a long screwdriver to hold it firm while you're getting the nuts loose. Next, what we want to do is take tension off these alternator and fan pulley belts. To do that, you have to do it at the alternator. So there's a tensioner, and the first thing you have to do to be able to turn the tensioner to loosen the belt tension is you have to loosen a 12 millimeter lock nut for the adjuster. And it's going to be a little hard to see, but it's down here right at the tip of this extension. It's right behind the two belts below the alternator. So you loosen that, it's a 12 millimeter, and then you have to turn the adjuster bolt, which is on the driver's side of the alternator. It's right in that area right there. It's a little hard to see because we have tight access to get the camera in there. Shooting from the driver's side, you could possibly see a better shot of that adjuster bolt right there. To get to the lock nut on the adjuster, I'm going to use my Gear Wrench flex head ratchet, about a 3-inch extension and a 12 millimeter socket. And you might take a look at that and think that you can't get onto the bolt with a socket, but there's just enough flex in the belt to be able to slip the socket onto there. You come in from the underside, and then you can work the socket onto the bolt. And with that locking bolt, you just want to get it loose. You don't have to take it out all the way. You just want to get it loose enough to where the adjuster can turn. After loosening the lock nut for the adjuster, you have to loosen the pivot bolt, because if the pivot bolt's tight, then when you're turning the adjuster for the belt, it's not going to move. So the 14 millimeter bolt that locks the alternator in place, you have to loosen that. That is right at the top of the alternator, pretty much like at about the 11 o'clock position. There we go. And it just has to be loose. You don't want to take it out all the way. The tool I'm going to use to turn the adjuster bolt is a flex head 12 millimeter ratcheting wrench. You're really going to want a ratcheting box end wrench for this, and flex head, in my opinion, because the access is hard. I could remove the battery and the battery box to give me easier access, and if I did that, I could get on there much easier, but I want to show you you can do it without removing the battery box. And if you do get frustrated and you don't have the right tool to get on there, then I would suggest just go ahead and removing the battery box and be able to get in there much easier through this direction instead of coming over the top. I'm going to reach my right hand underneath the power steering reservoir to be able to hold pressure to keep the wrench on the bolt while I work the wrench with my left hand. Let's see how this works. So it could be done. If I was a little taller, it'd be easier. So you get the idea. I'm going to keep working the wrench in this fashion. Once you release enough tension on the belts, you should be able to slip them off the alternator and then work them off the fan pulley and then get them out of the way. So I'm going to slip them off the alternator pulley first. So both belts are loose, and I'm just going to leave them right there. As part of this job, if you're going to be replacing all the belts, then you'd have to also take the AC belt off, because these are locked in by the AC belt. You see, I can't get them free. And so if you wanted to do that, there's an AC idler pulley down there, and you have to loosen the nut on that. And then there's another adjuster that you can turn to take tension off the AC belt. Then you could get the AC belt off, and then you could completely remove these belts. But as part of this job, Lee isn't going to be replacing these belts, so we don't have to mess with the AC belt. So here's the pulley I'm talking about. You have to loosen a nut on the front side there, and then you can turn this adjuster to take tension off the AC belt. Next, we want to remove the fan shroud and fan clutch assembly as one unit. Normally, there's a clip right here holding one of the transmission cooler hoses right there, and you'd want to unclip that, but on Lee's engine, that clip is no longer in existence, so we don't have to worry about that. So now let's go to the top. What we're going to do is we're going to remove the two bolts that hold the fan shroud to the radiator. These are a 12 millimeter. Now that we have the fan shroud loose, I'm going to remove the 4 nuts that hold the fan clutch to the fan pulley or to the water pump. And what I'm doing is I'm turning the fan clutch and getting the nut that I want to remove at the 12 o'clock position, so it's easier for me to access it. I'm just going to check to see if I can get this shroud loose. It's hung up here on the driver's side. Battery box is in the way. On second thought, I'm going to get this battery box out of the way. It's hindering me being able to pull this fan shroud out far enough to clear the upper nipple of the radiator. So I'm just going to go for it right now and remove the battery box. So I'm going to use a 10 millimeter socket. I'm going to disconnect the negative terminal first. And then there's a ground that goes to the body here. I'm going to take that out too. There we go. All right. Now we can just push this through the battery box. Now I'm going to disconnect the positive terminal, get that loose, and then push this through the battery box. Next, I'm going to loosen these 10 millimeter nuts that are the straps that hold the battery firm. I'm just using my flex head ratcheting 10 millimeter box end. Got it loose, back it off. Now these are J hooked into there. I'll remove the nuts all the way. And I'll slide this off, should be able to, or no, there's a second nut on there. Huh. I don't know why they put 2 of them on there. It's kind of weird. He had a weird thing with 2 nuts on each one of these J hooks. I don't know why they did that, but on this one on this side, it's really locked on there. So we just fish this one out and then can maybe get this one out. Yeah, so I'm gonna have to see if I can get this one looser, but it's really locked in there. And then now that that's out of the way, I can lift the battery out. With the battery out of the way, it exposes several 12 millimeter bolts you have to remove to get the battery box out. There's one right here on the driver's side fender. There's one right here towards the back of the box. There's one at the very bottom in this deep well. There's another one on the driver's side fender down lower. And then there's finally one down here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, looks like 5 bolts. I've got a long extension with my Milwaukee ratchet and a 12mm socket. I'm going to go for the deep ones first. Okay, I'm going to have to go to a shorter extension and get the other ones. All right, with all the bolts removed, we should be able to lift this thing out. And so you can see with the battery box out of the way, you have really easy access to the adjuster bolt to loosen tension on the belts. Your alternator's right here. So maybe I would suggest removing the battery box and just have an easier time to get in there. It just makes it much easier. And see, now you can see that with the battery box out of the way, it's not hindering us removing the fan shroud. The battery box was overlapping a little bit right here and causing me some grief. You have to pull the shroud out towards the back to where you can get it to clear this upper nipple, and then you can start sliding it out. So I can feel it's free, and now that I know that it's coming out, I'm going to wiggle the fan clutch off of the studs of the water pump, and just be careful not to pull back with a lot of force and slam it into the radiator. Should be able to remove these as one unit. What am I hooked up on here? Okay, so fan with fan clutch and the shroud. Here's the cooler nipple that I noticed it was loose and there were signs of leaking. So now that I have the fan shroud out of the way, maybe I don't have to pull the radiator out. Maybe I can tighten it right here. So I'm going to want to tighten it to where I can still turn this petcock valve. So angle it up a little bit. This one is a 19 and the one on the bottom is a 24. So to tighten that nipple, I was first able to break free the two fittings. There's a 24 and then there's a 19mm nut that's closer to the bend of the nipple. And you want to tighten them independently. So I broke them both free by using opposing force, and then I first tightened the 24mm big nut against the radiator, and then you set the angle that you want in that driver's side nipple and then lock that one in with a 19mm open end. So I'm purposely getting this nipple a little bit more upward, and so when you have to go in there in the future to turn the plastic petcock valve to drain the radiator, it's going to be more out of your way. And that's good and tight. Next, I'm going to remove the fan pulley off of the water pump, and that exposes the bolts and nuts you have to remove. So starting from the top, you have nut, bolt, bolt, bolt on the bottom, and then 2 more bolts on the right side. So it looks like it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bolts and 1 nut from what I can see. I might be missing one. I'll take a look at the factory service manual just to double check. So I was looking at it wrong. The very bottom one is also a nut. So you have a nut on the bottom, a nut on the top, and then you have 2 bolts on either side, and those look to be a 12mm. I'm going to break them free with my gear wrench ratchet, about a 6-inch extension and a 12mm socket. These don't have a very high torque value. I think it's 15 foot-pounds, so they should break free pretty easily for you. Now that they're all broken free, I'm going to zip them out the rest of the way with the Milwaukee gun. I'm just going to do a quick check and see if they're the same length. Okay, so far they're the same length, but you'll want to pay attention just in case there's different lengths. Oh, that's a longer one. This one came out of the upper driver's side, so that bolt is longer. Let's see what the last one is. And that one is the same length as the other one on the driver's side. So the two on the driver's side are longer and the two on the passenger side are shorter. If you heard that, a bunch of coolant came out. I brain farted. I should have got my catch basin underneath there. Made a little mess on my driveway, but no big deal. And then I'm gonna pull this thing out the rest of the way. And here's your water pump, and the gasket came out attached. It's a metal gasket. With the water pump out, we're now gonna wanna make sure that the surface is clean. So I'm just using a plastic scraper and getting any gunk off, so the new seal makes a leak-free connection. So use your tool of choice. I do suggest like plastic first, or you use like a brass brush, because you don't want to score the surface and then create a pathway for coolant to get past the metal seal. So just be careful when you're cleaning the surface to not go crazy with a metal implement. So we're going to work at this for a little bit and get it clean. To assist me with cleaning the surface for the water pump, I put a brass wheel on my Dremel and I used that. And then there were some tight areas that I couldn't get to with the wheel, and so I just used the plastic scraper, and then I used a brass brush, mainly at this area around the top stud. I couldn't really get good access with the wheel. And so now the surface looks pretty clean. I'm gonna clean it up a little bit more with some brake cleaner and a rag and get the surface nice and clean. And you can see that there's still some dirt on there even after cleaning it with the wire brush. So I'm gonna keep on cleaning it with some brake cleaner. So here's the new metal water pump gasket. It can only fit on one way based off of the contour that it's sealing. So you're gonna see that the gasket has a little raised ridge around the outside, and that raised ridge faces outward towards the radiator. So just slide it over the studs, and the studs will hold it in place while you get the water pump on. Again, Lee was a smart guy and went with a OEM water pump. I wouldn't suggest going aftermarket with these, but you could possibly save money by getting an ASIN, because a lot of times ASIN, and it says right there, ASIN is the manufacturer. So instead of buying it in a Toyota box, if you find the ASIN equivalent, then you're probably pretty safe going with the ASIN. It's just that when things come in a Toyota box, they're a little bit more expensive. So we'll slide this over the studs. Now that the water pump is on the studs, we can get the nuts started and the bolts started. And you don't need to see this. We'll come back when we got them all started. On the housing of the water pump, where it slides over the stud has a wider section that sinks into the housing. And what I noticed when putting the water pump on, I wasn't able to push it all the way flush. And I think that's maybe something to be concerned about. You don't just want to start tightening the nuts and force it. So what I did is I lined it up pretty good. I got the bottom one all the way sucked in, and then I just tapped really gently with a plastic mallet and got that thing to seat, because like I said, I don't want to be tightening that and it to be gouging the aluminum water pump sliding over that wide part of the stud. The torque spec for the 4 bolts and 2 nuts for the water pump are 15 foot-pounds. And I'm going to tighten those up gradually in a crossing pattern. You really want to just be careful and just tighten it up equally as you go in a crossing pattern. Okay, that's one pass. Okay, on this last pass, I think they're all gonna hit the spec. Okay, that hit. That hit. That hit. That hit. And the bottom right one hit. Now, what I like to do is just go around and double check. So I'm going to start at the top and go clockwise. Okay, that one's good. That one's good. That one's good. 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 Oh, see, this one wasn't close. Okay. I missed that one. So that's a good example of why you want to go around in a circle, because this hose right here was obscuring me seeing that one. So from my vantage point, I totally missed that one. So now they're all torqued 15 foot-pounds. Now that we have the water pump replaced, we're going to work on some of the hoses, because Lee wanted to update all the hoses he could, and so that includes the radiator hoses. So we're going to remove the top radiator hose from the engine right now. I'm going to use my bent nose needle nose pliers, get on there, compress the constant tension clamp, move it backwards, and then see if I can work this off with my hand. You can see that I was able to get it. If it was really fighting you, you could get in here with a pick tool and break free the connection, and then you could pull it off. And if you were doing this job and you weren't going to be replacing the hose, you would just want to be really careful with a tool like this so you don't pierce it. So that came off, and more coolant's dropping down. So now we're going to work on the lower radiator hose. Depending on a previous mechanic or do-it-yourselfer is going to determine how hard it is to get to the tabs on the constant tension clamps. So you'll have to just see for yourself which orientation they're in. For this one right here at the radiator, I'm going to come in with a straight needle nose pliers, compress it, and then move it back. It's a little bit easier said than done. Okay, should be able to work that off. Maybe not. I'm going to move it a little bit more. Okay, that's definitely off the nipple. I'm going to use my pick tool to get in here and help break it free. Okay, that should have gotten it. There we go. And there's resistance pulling it back because the hose is pretty short. So let me see if I can work this off. There we go. And this time we were smart and got the coolant container underneath. Okay, this one I'm going to get with a long nose, bent needle nose pliers. I just bought these. These are nice. They're like 11 inches long to allow you a little better reach. And then see if I could break this free with the pick tool. Okay, that should be broken free enough. And work this sucker off. Okay, that's hose number 2. Now we're going to work on the next one, and that one leads from the pipe that we just took the other one off over to the thermostat housing. So thermostat housing, and then that hose in between the two pipes. So I'm thinking, because that hose is short and it's going between two metal pipes, what I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to break free the thermostat housing and then just release the bottom clamp, and then I could work the hose and the whole assembly up this way. If I try to just remove the hose in between those two spots, it might be really difficult because it's short and it's not going to have much flex to it. So I'm going to break free the thermostat housing next. This first one closest to the front of the engine, I'm going to get onto it with a socket and my ratchet and a short extension. It's 12 millimeter, and that one's broken free. This one right here, the exhaust manifold insulator, or whatever you want to call it, is in the way, so I'm gonna have to get onto that with a box end wrench. This one under here I can get to by coming underneath the AC line, get on it. I got to be careful of this wiring harness that they zip tied there. I think I'm going to clip this zip tie and get this thing out of my way for right now. Scratch that idea, We just slid it up the AC pipe a little bit, and I think that gives us enough room. I just didn't want to be turning into it. Okay, that one's loose. And now I'll get onto the top one further back with a box end wrench. Okay, it's loose. Now I'm just going to work them all off. I think I am going to attempt to remove this, and hopefully they don't break because they look pretty rusty. That break, or it came out? I think it came out good.
Yeah.
So that's out of the way enough. We're just going to slide that over, and you can see that they're just a little short 12mm bolt. So now I can get access to this other one much easier. And this might happen to you. The stud actually came out of the housing, and we could just lock this into my vise, get the nut off, and then I'll just reset this stud back into the aluminum housing with some blue 242 Loctite to lock it in better so this doesn't happen, because ideally you just want the nut to come off, you don't want the whole stud to come out. I'll get that last one. Okay, we've got the thermostat housing loose. Now we're going to compress that lower clamp, get it off the bottom pipe, and then hopefully be able to pull this whole assembly out as one unit. I'm going to choose another long needle nose pliers to compress that constant tension clamp below and pull it up. Let's see if I can break it free. Nope. I'm going to have to use the pick tool. Get underneath here and in between the hose and the fitting. Okay, that probably broke it free enough. Okay, I think that might do it. I'm going to slide it off the studs here and see if I can work this hose off. This whole thing is moving. This thing is really flimsy. I'm going to see if I can find out where that attaches and take it off as one unit. So this coolant pipe attaches right underneath the AC compressor with two 12mm nuts. I could get on one of them with a socket. The other one, it looks like I'm going to have to get with a box end wrench or an open end wrench. So I'm using my Milwaukee ratchet with like a 12-inch extension to get the one closest to the front. Okay, and then this one, I'm going to try breaking free with my flex head 12mm. Okay, both of the 12mm nuts are out, and then this should be able to slide off the studs. Okay, so now that's free. Cool. So now with those two nuts disconnecting that water pipe, now I should be able to lift this whole assembly up. I hope I can feed it through here. Maybe not. I can feed it this way. That bottom bracket's kind of long. I got to go underneath and take a look. I don't know if I can feed it out this way or not. Let's see if we can feed it down this way. You can feed it down this way?
Yep.
Cool.
Straight down.
Okay. It appears it's easier to remove it coming down out the bottom. So that's what we're doing. So now we have the whole assembly. Now with this thing out, I could just pull this off really easily. And then we'll slide this clamp out of the way. We'll compress this one, and then we'll get this hose off of the thermostat housing neck. So I'm using my bent nose needle nose pliers, press it, and work this sucker off. This one is not compressing enough to almost get it free. Okay, there it goes. That sucker is on there, so I'll have to use the pick tool again. You can see all that corrosion there, so that's what's fighting you from getting it off. Don't stab your hand, Tim. Okay, maybe I've broken it free enough to where I can work this off now. Maybe not. Man, that sucker's on there. I'm going to work at this for a while and get this thing free. I finally have it broken free enough to get this sucker off. Man, look at all that corrosion. So I'm going to clean this up really good, probably with my Dremel tool and a wire wheel, and clean this up really nice. I'm going to use the same brass wheel that I used to clean up the connection to the engine block for the water pump. See how this does. I might have to go to an actual steel wheel. Yeah, it's not quite doing it. You get the idea. We're gonna have to work at this for a while. I used my Dremel tool with the brass wheel at first, but then the brass wheel, it's a cheap one. It kind of fell apart. I went to one of these little buffing wheels. They have different grits, and I cleaned it up pretty good. There is some pitting that we can see and feel, so hopefully when we get the new hose on there, it will get a leak-free seal. It's pitted on the upper part here, but down here it looks like it's not damaged really at all. So I think I'm gonna have to try to remember it. I'm gonna try to get the clamp close to here so it's getting a nice clamp where the surface of the neck is more intact than over here on the edge. We're ready to remove the thermostat, and you want to take note of the jiggle valve, this little doohickey right here. And on this engine, it's pointing up at the 12 o'clock position, so I'm assuming that is the correct position. On some engines, it's pointing downwards on the 5VZ engine. I didn't look this up in advance, and I don't have the factory service manual, so I'm just assuming that it's supposed to be at the 12 o'clock position. So I'm just going to wiggle this thing out. It's a little stuck in there. The gasket's what's stuck, so I'll peel this sucker out. And this gasket just slips over like so. There's a slot there, and it slides over the outside of the thermostat. So now we're at the point where we're going to start working on some of the heater hoses and the heater control valve at the back of the engine. And this where it gets kind of hard. And depending on how hard it looks, I might not be replacing all of them. There's a very good chance I won't be replacing all of them because it's just way too tight to get in there. And you just got to cross your fingers and hope that they never burst, because maybe the easiest way is pulling the engine out. So I don't know. So we'll give it the old college try. In regards to the clamps that hold the heater hoses on at the back of the engine, the original clamps are kind of weird. Some of them are like these twist types that has like a cotter key and it twists and tightens them up. And then the other ones, the replacement ones, the newer ones, are constant tension clamps. And it looks like he's got a mix of them on this engine. So if we go to the back here, you'll see there's a constant tension here, but then this one is like, if you could see that little thing, that cotter key is that style, and those are a little bit more of a pain in the butt. I think what I'm going to do is just try to cut this off with a pair of dikes, and then anything that has a constant tension clamp, I'll just compress it and slide the clamp back so I can free it of the fitting. So I'm going to see if I could cut this. Good luck. I'll have to figure this out. I can't really get a good purchase with the dikes to cut it, so I'm going to use a Dremel tool with a metal cutting blade and just carefully cut it. We're replacing this valve anyways, so if you were going to be doing heater hose replacements without replacing the heater control valve, you just want to be careful how much you cut. So I'm just going to try to cut through the band of the clamp and not actually cut deep into the hose and mess up the fitting. There it is. I'm going to do the same with this one. Okay, that one's cut too. So I'm just working these off with needle nose pliers. Maybe a screwdriver would be a better tool, but there we go. So those are both off. Now, getting it off of here, I could slide it off pretty easily. That's pretty nice. Okay, that one's off. I'll try to slide this off of here. Probably have to use a pick tool for this one. So I'm using a small pick tool, getting in between the pipe and the hose and working it around to break it free. I could see a little corrosion coming out. I have these hose pliers in different diameters. I think this is a 5/8 one. I think this will be the appropriate one, and maybe it could help me slip this off. Maybe not. It's getting a good bite on it, but it's just getting it over the edge. I'm working a little smarter here. I'm grabbing ahead of the fitting and pushing with it, and it seems to be working. I'm working it off. Okay, there we go. So the first heater hose is off on the back of the engine. Okay, let's work on the next one. This next one on the curved pipe has those twist fittings too, so I'm going to do the Dremel again. Just be careful not to cut too deep. think that's got that one. Yep, that one's free. This one is at a little bit of a weird angle. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get this one with the cutter without potentially making a huge mistake and cutting it into the wiring harness or something. I think I'm going to try to twist this one loose and get it off that way, because I don't want to make a big mistake and do some damage. I don't know if the needle nose pliers is the right tool or not. I'm going to get a little screwdriver. I was able to get my dikes in there and cut one of the bands, and it seems pretty loose now. You could also twist these with the small screwdriver. You can get it in there. You can put it in and twist the whole thing and unwind it. So that's unwound pretty far. All right, that one's free. I'll use a screwdriver to work this one off. Okay, that one's free too. Okay, we're not doing too bad. Okay, so now the question is, will I be able to loosen this? I think it needs some pick tool action. Actually, I think I'm going to try to get this one off as one unit. I'll loosen it on the straight side. This way I could use the fitting to help me twist it. There we go. So we got this sucker off. Now I'm just going to work this in between the hose and the fitting and get this little hose section free. There we go. There's that one. Okay, now it looks like we have to jump over to the driver's side. This has all been on the passenger side, and we'll work on those. All right, we're on the driver's side of the engine now, and we're going to work on getting the hose that connects up to the heater control valve. And luckily, these are just constant tension clamps. So I'm using a straight nose needle nose pliers, compress it, and slide it back. And that one's already moving on that. That's loose. Okay, that's good. And then I'm going to get this one that goes down to a metal pipe. I'm going to compress that and slide that one up. Okay, see if I could slide it off this heater control valve. That was easy. And then this one, not so easy. Let me see if I can get on there with those fancy pliers. Get around it and squeeze it and just give it a little twist. Okay, I got it loose. I got to clamp and pull up with my left hand to slide it off. There we go. So that was the easiest one yet. That was nice. Okay, I think the next thing we're going to do is we're going to remove the heater control valve. One thing I messed up and I didn't tell Lee to do is when he drove up and before he turned off the engine, he should have put the heater control valve all the way in the cold position, because that's what the factory service manual instructs you to do before you remove the heater control valve. His is somewhere in the middle between cold and hot, and we're just going to leave that there. And it has to do with the actuation of the cable moving the control valve to fully open, partially open, or all the way closed. And we're just going to have to hope that we didn't mess with the calibration. If we did, then we'll have to maybe reset the cable afterwards by putting it in the cold position and then making sure everything is correct. But for right now, we're just going to have to go with what we have. And there's a little metal tab, and if you pull that out and free it, that releases the cable housing. And then the end of the cable housing slides over a little post here, and then that's free. And then I can work this thing out all the way. And what's nice is that there's some indentations of where the old clamp was grabbing it. So if we just mimic that and mimic the position that the heater control valve is in, we should be okay, I hope. We've got the vehicle jacked up and supported on jack stands on the front end because we want to investigate one short hose that Lee bought that you access through the driver's side wheel well. So we're going to take a look and see how hard it is to get to, and then make a determination of whether or not we're going to replace it. So here we go. Just going to take the wheel off with my Milwaukee impact gun. To get a better line of sight to the engine, I'm going to remove at least this one mud flap right here. They're held on with plastic clips, and I just have this plastic clip removal tool. Get underneath it and pry it out. You're most likely going to break them, but sometimes they'll pop free without breaking. I think that one broke. Maybe it's still good. Okay, now let's see what we could see here. I don't know what I'm looking for. I'll have to investigate here a little bit. So Lee spotted it, and it looks very, very difficult to remove while the engine is still in the engine compartment. So I don't feel up to it trying to get to that one. I think that could generate a total nightmare where Lee is spending the night at my house. So we're not going to go for that one either. So there's several that we're not going to go for. We're not going to go for that one way down underneath the engine. And then there's some other ones up here on the back side. I'll show you. There's one back there that goes straight back to the firewall. There's another one down below that kind of slopes down. And as you can see, the access is super tight. One side of each of those has a constant tension clamp, and the other side has that twisty clamp. And I could just see that being a nightmare, so we're not going to go for those either. So I'm, as they say, pussing out, and I'm not going to go for those. We're just going to now get the heater control valve disconnected, get the new one on, and get these hoses that we've already taken off replaced. Okay, we're going to disconnect the heater control valve from the firewall. 10mm bolts. And there it is. Here's the new heater control valve. I've put the lever in about the same position the other one was in. You got to push the bolt through the grommet, and then I'm going to push the other one through. It's a little bit of a tight fit, kind of like on your prom date. And now we'll fit this up here and see if we can get these bolts started. There we go. That one's finally started. And that one started. I don't have a torque value for these. What I'm going to do is just use a 1/4 inch ratchet with a 10mm socket and just go by feel. Okay, that one's cinched up. And that one's good. Okay, I'm slipping the cable over the end of the post here on the valve, and then I gotta get the clamp attached now. I'm trying to get it in the same position it was before, where it was clamping onto the cable. Capture the cable, bring the clip over. There we go. It's clamping the cable housing in the same spot it was before, and we've got the lead end over the post of the valve arm. So that's done right there. We're gonna get the heater hose on the driver's side connected first. He bought replacement clamps, so I got that one on, and then I'm gonna slide this one on. On this driver's side, when we got the new hose on, we found that it was kinked pretty bad. And so we went back to the old one and we're comparing them, and you can see that it's a little bit longer by like maybe as much as a 1/2 inch. So we're going to trim a little bit off this new hose, because when we got it in position from the coolant pipe to the heater control valve, it was bending and crimping, which would constrict the flow of coolant through there, which would not be a good thing. So we're going to cut this with a pair of scissors. If you want to have an easier time sliding these heater hoses on, you could dip your finger in some coolant. I'm just using a little bit of simple green, whatever type of soapy solution, just to make it a little slick in there, so it's easier to slide the sucker on there. Slide this on there first, this end, and then slide this end. And that's better than it was. It was really crimped. Okay, now I'm gonna release the tab on here and get the clamp the spring. Gonna pull that off. It's almost where I want it. One thing you have to think about when you're getting these clamps back on is you want to put them in the position that you're going to find it easiest to get to if you ever have to go back in here. And so get them in the position that you want and that you could easily get a tool onto it in the future. Okay, this right side is done. Now we got to go back to the passenger side. Lee didn't have a short section of hose for this passenger side, so he brought some bulk 5/8 heater hose, and we're gonna slide this on. We'll get the other one slid on. And then we got to get our clamps in place. Need a total of 4, huh? Okay, need it on this one. This aftermarket stuff is a little bit skinnier, it looks like. Just gotta make sure that they're all sunk in the right amount. This curve fitting on the bottom connecting up to the pipe towards the right, they pretty much butt up against each other. They're that close. There's really not much hose in between. I'm gonna pull this one off. That drops somewhere on top of the engine. Pull this one off. Again, somewhere on top of the engine. And then the last one. Okay, I'm just gonna double check and get them in a better position with a bent nose, needle nose pliers and call it good. All right, I'm happy with where the clamps are at now. All right, so we're done with the back of the engine with replacing the heater control valve and the few hoses that we replaced. Now we're gonna go back to the front of the engine. Lee got this small little hose that goes from the water neck that houses the thermostat, and it goes to this pipe and goes somewhere. Don't know exactly where. But we're gonna replace that one. I bought these fancy things. I may as well try them out. Look at that. Works just like it's supposed to. I guess these tools are pretty good. Be able to grab the hose and twist it. Okay, where's the replacement? This is a lot longer. Sure this is the right one? So this is the old hose. This is supposedly the new hose, but I'm not so sure if this is the right one, but we can trim this and make it work. So that's what we'll do. We're gonna trim this one a little bit. As you can see, it's quite a bit longer, but it's clearly the same diameter, so it's gonna work. So we have the new hose cut to the right length. I'm gonna slide it over and slide it over. And there it is there. That one's replaced. New thermostat gasket. Gonna feed the gasket over the edge here. Remember, like I said, there's a slot in there, so you just have to get the gasket where it's going over both sides. You see how it hangs over both sides. And remember, the jiggle valve was facing upward, so we're gonna put that back in there. If you saw any corrosion in here, you'd want to clean up this surface so you make sure you're not gonna get a leak. This thing came out pretty darn clean. I don't see anything, so I think we're good to go. Just gonna set that right there, and that will just sit in place there. It won't fall out. If you're gonna replace this hose that goes in between this pipe and the thermostat housing neck, there's two different diameters. This diameter is smaller than this diameter, so don't get the hose on backwards. So whatever side is smaller, it goes towards this pipe, and the bigger opening goes towards the thermostat housing. And it's gonna be the same way with the lower radiator hose, I believe. There's gonna be two different sizes. So here's the lower radiator hose, and it does appear this side right here that attaches to this water pipe is smaller than this side that goes to the bottom of the radiator. So we have the thermostat housing neck attached to the hose in between this pipe, and now we're going to go back underneath the rig and feed it up through like we took it out. Our plan to pre-connect these hoses to the pipe down below didn't really work out very well because you really have to get it in the right angle for things to fit right, so we abandoned that. I just reattached that pipe down below with the two 12mm nuts under the AC compressor, and then we're just going to get them on individually. I'm going to again lubricate the hose with a little bit of cleaner. You could use coolant. The soap is a little bit slipperier, so it enables you to twist the hose and get it in the right orientation. Okay, we've got the hose connected to that pipe down below. Fit it over the stud. So we finally have the thermostat housing connected up to the back side of the water pump here. Like I said, we thought we can pre-connect these hoses and get the clamps where they need to be, but you really need the ability to twist it to get the right orientation, because if you don't, then the housing's not going to line up very well. And so we discovered that the hard way. We got all 3 nuts back connected, and we're going to torque these to 15 foot-pounds. Just going to bring them up slowly. Okay, that hit. That hit. And that hit. I'm just going to do one more go around here. Okay, those are all good. So I used the long nose needle nose and the bent nose needle nose to finally get those constant tension clamps in place. You generally want to get them pretty close to the end of the hose, so you're making sure you're grabbing the actual fitting. You don't want to get them too low. So I found most of the time you want to get them probably within about a 1/4 inch from the end of the hose, and that's usually a good spot. And you'll see that I have the clamps in an orientation that I can get on there in the future if I need to take that hose off. All right, we have the lower radiator hose, and remember what I said, there's a smaller side and a bigger side. The smaller side goes towards the metal pipe, the bigger side goes towards the lower radiator hose nipple. And you want to get your clamps in place before sliding it on. So let's see how this will go. Okay, get it on the pipe first. And then bend this and get it on here. That looks pretty good. One thing I learned is that when the clamps are fitting pretty darn tight, like this one was at the connection of the lower radiator hose to the radiator, this frickin' label was causing me a little resistance. So I would suggest, if the label's in the area where you're going to put the clamp, just peel off the label. So that was a learning experience. I've never had that issue before with a label getting in my way, but it did on this occasion. Next, we're going to put the heat shield back on. No torque value for these. We're just cinching them up snug with a 1/4 inch ratchet. Now we're going to get the fan clutch back in the fan shroud. Before I grab the fan clutch and the shroud, I want to slide the water pump pulley or fan pulley back on. I'll just fit those belts on there loosely right now. So I got the fan clutch and the fan shroud. Just remember the orientation. The bolt tabs have to go up, and gonna fit this in and drop it down. Could slide the fan clutch over the studs. Then I just got to work on getting this fan shroud fully seated. There's some transmission cooler hoses in the way on the bottom right here. What helped to get the fan shroud in place is I went underneath on the driver's side, and you can then have an easier time manipulating the transmission cooler hoses out of the way, and then you could see the tab of the shroud that has to slide into its female part. And so if you get underneath there, you can see it really easily. This is the area I'm talking about. If you look right back in here, you can see where the tab slides in and locks in place on the shroud. So I'm just getting the 12mm bolts that attach the fan shroud to the radiator in. The torque spec is something really light, like 50 inch-pounds or something like that, 43 inch-pounds. I'm just gonna go by feel with this small 1/4 inch ratchet. Okay, those are good. Now I'm gonna get the 4 fan clutch nuts in place. The best way to get them in is pinch it between your index finger and thumb and get the one you want to get started on the top at the 12 o'clock position, and then get it started. Okay, I've got all the nuts touched down with the 12mm box and wrench. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the technique of wedging in a small pry bar, and I'm going to get them cinched up that way. You could go ahead and tighten up the belts and then use the belt tension to help you get them tight, but that's just personal choice. I'm going to do it with the small pry bar. Okay, those are all nice and tight. I slipped the 2 parallel alternator fan belts over the alternator pulley, and then now I'm tightening up the belt tension using my 12mm flex head ratcheting box head wrench. So when you want to tighten a belt properly and you don't have a belt tension gauge and you don't have the access to get in there with the belt tension gauge, like in this situation, the amount you tighten it is you're looking for about a 1/2 inch of deflection. And what that means is you grab onto the belt halfway between two pulleys and you push and pull on it. And you shouldn't be able to push it down or pull it up any more than about a 1/2 inch. That's just a rough estimate. And so that's where we're at right now. We have about a 1/2 inch of deflection. Now we're going to torque the lock nut for the adjuster. It's torqued to 15 foot-pounds. There it is, 15 foot-pounds. Now we're going to torque the pivot bolt, and we are going to torque that to 43 foot-pounds. We had to switch to a 14mm socket, and we're going to get on it and torque it. And there it is, 43 foot-pounds. All right, we're going to get the upper radiator hose on. The side with the white line should face the radiator, and then the straighter side should go towards the pipe on the engine. I'm going to pull these loose. Okay, upper radiator hose is connected. There's one last hose we're gonna change for Lee, and it's this number 3 bypass pipe. So it's already been disconnected when we began the job right here. So we just got to get down in here with a long needle nose pliers and compress the clamp and get it out. Okay, I got the clamp up on the hose. Let's see if I can get in here with this Dumaflachi and loosen it. Here we go. I'm just levering against the distributor cap here. We're going to reuse these clamps, so I'm going to transfer them over. Okay, we'll slide it over the nipple here. Sweet. All right, we got the bottom connection, and now we're going to slide the upper connection and get that one in place. And boom goes the dynamite. We're going to get the battery tray back in place. The grommet came out. Just got to push this grommet back in place. Okay, we have all the 12mm bolts that attach the battery tray to the body. Now we're going to drop our battery in. We got the battery dropped in, and we're working on getting the 2 J-hooks and the battery properly tightened in here. The J-hook on the driver's side hooks into the body, and then the other J-hook just goes into this battery tray. And you could see where there's damage where it just kind of ripped through. So it's not the greatest design because it's being held by plastic. We have the battery cinched up in the battery tray with the bracket and the 2 J-hooks. Now we're just reconnecting the battery cables, 10mm. Okay, and those are good. Don't forget to reattach the negative ground to the inside of the driver's side fender with the 10mm bolt. All right, we're finally at the point where we're going to top off the engine coolant. I'm going to use my Lyle or Lizzle spill-free funnel. You got to find the right adapter with the right cap to fit. So I got these two, and these are the right ones. You put the adapter in, the black washer side down, and then you get your cap on. There we go. Then we get the funnel, put it in there, and we're ready to fill. Now, you might want to do a sanity check and just make sure everything is connected before you start pouring your coolant in there, because if you brain farted and you left the lower radiator hose disconnected or something else, you're going to be making a big mess, and then you're going to be cursing yourself. So just do a good double check, make sure all the hoses that are supposed to be reattached are reattached, and then start filling up the radiator. So here we go, double checking. And we got all the ones in the back at the heater hoses, right?
Correct.
So we're going to fill up the system with the Toyota Long Life antifreeze. It's a concentrate, so you have to mix it with distilled water to make your 50-50 mix. So I'm just going to pierce this and pull that out. I know this system is going to take at least 2 gallons. So I'm going to pour a whole gallon of concentrate followed by a whole gallon of the distilled water, and then we'll have to top off the rest of it by doing a mix in a smaller container where we'll pour maybe like a 1 quart of coolant, 1 quart of distilled water, and then top off the system the rest of the way. One thing I forgot is that you'll want to get the old coolant out of the reservoir, so let's do that before I forget. This reservoir just slides into a metal bracket, so if you get underneath it and pull up, you can free it. And then we're just going to pour this into the container we drain out the other coolant into. So you can see the bracket that the reservoir snaps into. It just slides right into here. Just push it down and snap it in place. Okay. Now we'll start filling. Okay, we've got the gallon of Toyota concentrate in there. Now we're gonna put a gallon of distilled water. You don't want to use tap water because that has minerals in it and it will corrode your system. Always use distilled water. All right, the system took a full gallon of distilled water, a full gallon of coolant concentrate. Now we're gonna mix some more. I'm gonna use this 1 gallon jug. It has graduated lines. So I'm just gonna start by mixing 1 more quart. So I'm gonna fill up to the half quart here with coolant and then top it up to the 1 quart level with the distilled water. That's pretty good. Okay, so that's 1 quart of a 50-50 mix. And we'll pour this into the Lyle funnel. I'm not sure what the complete capacity of this, but I know it's somewhere over 2 gallons. So let's pour this in. Okay, so it looks like we're pretty darn close. But knowing that once we start the system, air is going to work its way out, I'm going to go ahead and mix 1 more quart because we are most likely going to deplete this with working the air out. And then I'm going to have to add some also to the reservoir, so I'm going to go ahead and mix 1 more quart. All right, we're ready to start the engine. Again, one last sanity check. Check the top of your engine, especially around the belts and anything that's a moving part, and make sure all your tools and all the old parts and everything's out of the way. All right, we did a good double check. Lee's going to start the engine, and hopefully we're not going to see any leaks. Looks good so far. Lee turned his heater control valve all the way hot. Go ahead and go all the way cold. I want to see where it moves to. Okay, so that moved about 90 degrees. Okay, switch it back to hot. Okay, so it moved all the way down to the bottom, pointing towards the driver's side. So you're going to want to turn your heater control all the way hot because you want the coolant to be flowing through the heater core and all the heater core hoses so you can get all the air out of the system. So just make sure that you go all the way hot. You don't necessarily have to have the fan going, but you have to have the heater control all the way in the hot position. So you'll watch this, you'll see bubbles coming up. So if you go to the throttle body and you increase the idle, you'll expedite moving the air out of the system. So go on the funnel again. Another thing that's good is to have the front end of the vehicle higher than the rear end. So If you're on flat ground, maybe jack up your rig and put it on jack stands a little bit higher, or in our case, my driveway sloped a little bit, so it's higher near the garage door and it goes downhill towards the street. So we're in the perfect position because air rises, so you want the radiator the highest point in your cooling system, and it is right now. All right, we were revving the engine and we got to the point where we weren't seeing too many more bubbles come out, more air escaping the system. And so we're gonna call it good with the burping of the system. The cool thing about this Lyle spill-free funnel is it is spill-free. So what you're gonna wanna do is you're gonna wanna squeeze the upper radiator hose to push a little bit of coolant out. And you're gonna see it bubble up in here. And then you're gonna put the plunger in there, and then what that did by squeezing the upper hose is it pushed a little bit out to where when we pull this off, it's not gonna spill out and make a mess. Just like that. And then I'm gonna transfer this right over to the reservoir, and I'm gonna pull the plunger out and let it drain into there. And then now I'm gonna wanna top this off to the full line.
More, a little bit more.
A little more?
Yeah. That's good. That's at full.
From experience, I know that the level is going to drop a little bit because you can't get all the air out of the system. So I'm going to purposely overfill this with a little bit and just use the rest of this 50-50 mix. And then what I suggest you do is you check it over the next few days. And if it drops a little bit, then add it back up to the full mark if you're hot. If you're cold, then go to the cold level. But like I said, every time I've drained the system, I've always found that over time, the next few days, the system is going to work more air out and it's going to drop a little bit on you. And then don't forget to put your radiator cap back on. Lastly, we're going to get the skid plate back on. We're not going to show it. If you got it out, you can get it back on. Just remember to go in from the driver's side towards the passenger side and slide it in place. All right, we're all done with the job. We succeeded, not 100% because the goal was to replace all the heater hoses, but some of them just look such a pain in the butt to get to, and he lives far away, and I didn't want to get into something that was going to cause him to be stuck here 2 hours away from home. So we did what we felt comfortable with, and we succeeded in that regard. We replaced the water pump, we replaced both the upper and lower radiator hoses, we replaced the heater control valve, we replaced a few of the hoses at the back of the firewall that attach to the heater control valve. We replaced a couple small little bypass hoses that are on the front of the engine that lead to the radiator, and that one that was near the water pump and the thermostat housing. And then we also replaced the thermostat and those hoses that lead from the thermostat housing. There's a hose between that and a metal pipe, and then from the metal pipe it goes to the lower radiator hose. So we replaced the majority of the hoses that make up the cooling system on this FJ80, but we did leave those ones, especially those ones at the back of the firewall and the one that was way underneath that we spied from the wheel well. I don't know, you'd have to be in the right frame of mind and ready for battle to get to those, and I just wasn't up to it. And like I said, we just didn't have the time to mess with that and potentially get him stuck here. So I hope you learned something. I hope it helps you out with your FJ80. Peace out, happy wrenching, sick mods, and sick cooling system maintenance on your FJ80 Land Cruiser with the 1FZ engine. Bye-bye.